has with the people of Israel. God wants us to experience life abundantly. Our stories talk about that. The Old Testament talks about people listening to God, people like Noah who picks up wood and hammer and builds a boat. And as a result, God makes a covenant with all of humanity. Sometimes the story is like Naomi, where it's a little harder to see that maybe it's God calling. But her daughter-in-law stays with her, a marriage occurs, and this leads down the line to the birth of Jesus. The big picture in the New Testament is Jesus telling us over and over again how to be in relationship with God and as a result with one another. We, the people of God's church and God's body today, are the people in these stories. The names change, but each of these stories is about a relationship, a call and a response, someone wrestling with a way to answer God's call. Yet we read that God never gives up on us, the people who do the wrestling, the people who fall down a lot in the stories, in these old stories and in today's world. While we go about our daily lives, wrestling and falling down and getting up again, God keeps calling. And God gives us the tools that we need. In each of the stories today read by you, and thank you for your reading, God calls us in a clear, sometimes no guessing kind of way, like in Samuel, where the young man is called, and God uses his name, Samuel, Samuel. Just like your memory of being called in from the backyard. Your name makes the call easy to hear. When my older sister stuck her head out and yelled, I was supposed to yell back from wherever I was in the neighborhood, coming! If I didn't, boy, there was trouble once I got home. And in the passage read by this young man about Samuel, the boy does answer. And Samuel grows up to be a judge and a guide for the nation of Israel, leading them with wisdom and God's help. But I don't think that type of call where my name is used or your name is used happens very often. I think we need to be open to hearing a call with an unfamiliar ringtone. Listen again to the verses from Ruth. Do not urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. This may not sound like much of a call from God. The ringtone is all wrong. But Naomi, the listener, knows that the words are for her. She allows Ruth's words to sink into her heart. Allowing Ruth to stay with her is going to be a hard thing for her to do. Their husbands are dead. Widows have no voice in society, no place that they belong. Their prospect for a good life is very slim. And Ruth probably would have been better off going back to her own people. But she insists that she be allowed to stay with her mother-in-law. Naomi opened her heart, answered the call that sounded more like a whiny woman, and God gave the women an opportunity to glean grain from the field, thereby meeting a man named Boaz. Ruth marries him, has a child, who becomes the grandfather of King David, and the lineage of Jesus is carried on. Without Naomi answering that whiny call, the story would be different. Sometimes, like in this story, God uses a very human voice to carry on the circumstances. Sometimes, like Moses, the baby floating in the river, circumstances shape a call. A Pharaoh's daughter needs a bath. She pulled the baby out of the water, saving Moses, so Moses can save God's people. A princess responded to what she saw right in front of her. How have you responded to what's right in front of you? What might a call look like or sound like today? There aren't too many baskets floating by in the river. Not too many of us need to sleep in the church at night so that God might call us. Some calls are easy to recognize. God calling Adam and Eve to fill the earth. Noah, make me an ark. Abram, go to a land where I will show you. God calling and making sure they're equipped. But perhaps the person sitting right next to you is asking you to do something. Can you hear them? And are you willing to answer? A few weeks ago, I heard my name in the church narthex. Danny, will you help serve food at our upcoming event? It's an easy job, so I said, sure, why not? An easy job. But what about those times when we're being called and we feel less than able? We're not up to the task. We don't want to hear the call. We wish the signal would drop or our phone battery would die at that moment. When Jesus called the disciples in the book of Mark, they're at their jobs as fishermen. They have lives, they have homes, they have families, they have obligations, things they need to tend to. Yet they drop their nets, they leave their jobs and their homes. I think this is an amazing act of courage on their part. How clearly they must have heard God calling them. Jesus said, follow me and I will make you fish for people. Now the fishing part they knew. I can do that, I can fish. I know I've got the skills, but Jesus said fish for people? What an odd request. They may not have felt ready for that task. But Jesus didn't abandon them. He walked with them, he worked with them, teaching them day after day, giving them the skills they needed. In Matthew 28, as Jesus is leaving them, one of the last things he says to the disciples is, I will be with you to the end of the age. Our God has promised to be with us as we work to build the community we're called to build. But first, the disciples had to drop their nets and say, I can hear you. Now, maybe sometimes saying I can hear you takes a huge leap of faith. You don't have any experience in your resume, no skills to rely on. Like Mary, a young girl being asked to do an extraordinary task. She may have been frightened, feeling unready. She was probably aware that she was opening herself to ridicule in the town. But she trusted the words of assurance that God was with her in this endeavor. And she answered saying, here I am, servant of the Lord. These stories are our stories. We're in there somewhere, every one of us. And I know that you answer when God calls. I notice that you have a shape sheet, and I bet a lot of you have filled this out. And I know from that that you are answering the call. As I was preparing my sermon, I said to Gretchen, is there one person who does everything in your church, the one go-to guy or gal? Her answer was, everyone pitches in and helps. We have a generous church family. They give of their time and their talents. You are saying, I can hear you. I know that you answer the call by organizing the nursery schedule and teaching Sunday school. Coffee and cookies appear on platters and the kitchen gets cleaned up. You lift your voices and your instruments in joyous song. Bulletins get folded because you do it. You host the Thursday night Faith Alive gathering. You organize the crop walk. You fire up the grill for the picnics. Some of you fill this pulpit on the fourth Sunday. You call people when you know they simply need a cheery voice to hear. You have a marvelous website because you contribute to that. You take the offering, you greet people, you serve as lay leader, you prepare communion, you help out with special church services. You are answering God's call in a multitude of ways. But because I don't know you well, I'm sure there's other things you do that I don't know about. Things that you may not think of as answering God's call. But I read recently in Barbara Brown Taylor's book, An Altar in the World, no work is too small to play a part in the work of creation. At Cirque du Soleil, the person who replaces the light bulbs is very important to the high wire artist who must see where to place her foot. You are saying, I can hear you all the time. But are there ways you can expand on your response? Is there a task you'd rather not do? So you want to stand where the signal isn't quite so clear. If you're being asked to do something as easy as, will you drive me to the grocery store? Or something hard like Mary gets asked, something out of your comfort zone, trust that God will provide for you the skills and the courage, whatever is required to answer the call. You may have an opportunity to step in when cruelty is happening and you could be the voice of love. I've been thinking about the 12-year-old Rebecca Sedgwick, who was bullied so brutally and so often that she jumped off a tower to end her life. Had she sent out a call and no one said, I can hear you? What about the two girls that bullied her? Who was listening to them? We need to open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to those kind of calls that don't come with a special ringtone or a clear signal. Calls right in our own home, school, and neighborhood. Calls where we can make a difference. You've already said here in your church, I can hear you. Continue to respond with a faithful heart. Know that God calls because there is a genuine need, and God will walk with you when you say, I can hear you. The people in our scriptures are real people. People like all of us. People struggling to hear and not always getting it right, so you don't have to worry about always getting it right. They are people that maybe we hold up and look at them like they're heroes, but they're learning to rely on God in their human frailties to provide what is needed, to answer when God calls. If we could trust like Mary, if we could forge ahead like Abram, we can boldly answer when the call comes. We can respond. We can say, I can hear you now, and may it be so.